Hey everybody, and welcome back to Beneath the Beat podcast. Today we are talking with Dutcher Snedeker from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's in a band called Earth Radio, and they just released a new album, Reanimate, which you can find on all streaming platforms. Without further ado, Dutcher Snedeker.
Hey.
What up, Dutcher? How's it going?
Golf clap.
It's going great. I had a good weekend up north. Did a couple wedding gigs.
There you go.
It's nice to get in a little playing. And
So how did those wedding gigs go? Like, what were people like social distancing? Were you guys like wearing masks or?
Yeah, so it's been interesting because the people who are like, we're having a wedding this year, you're like, okay, like we've had like 20 people reschedule next year, but like, so for the most part, everybody has been at least respectful of people's decisions. Not everyone has been, like I've only had one wedding where everybody was masked, even the bride and groom, and they made it like a whole thing about it. They like worked it into the theme, made it fun. But everyone else, they feel like it's like, oh, it's, we're really private. It's our family and friends. Nobody's sick. Like, but I put on my mask and I'm like just in the corner, like waiting. I usually keep my mask on if I'm like, because a lot of these outdoor weddings have tents. So if I'm like on stage in the tent, I usually have my mask on, and if I'm moving through the crowd. Because that's like where I'm just kind of like, all right.
Is there a lot of like dancing that happens? Because I know I'm playing a wedding coming up, and they're saying like no dancing, just kind of hang out, like really. I was like, I don't know how it's gonna work, man.
Yeah, that would be a first for me. All the weddings I've done, everyone's been like the one that was really masked, everyone was like, given a decent amount of space, but for the most part, it's felt like a normal like, wedding thing. So,
yeah, that was a first for me too. I heard that. I was like, I don't know if that's gonna work. So.
Yeah, this COVID thing is like really, I feel like transforming so much of like the music industry. Really, like I'm playing a gig next week, which is my first gig since this whole thing happened. And it's supposedly, at least as far as I understand, it's a drive-in concert, which will be odd because it's super cool, but I've never done anything like that. So it's like, I don't know what to expect. It's like
the cool thing is I don't think anybody else has either.
Yeah, very true. I don't know. It's cool to see the way that, things are shifting. And speaking of that, you played fundraiser festival, right? The Your Voice festival that was like social distancing and everything like that, right?
Yeah, that was, I'm trying to remember, that was the one with it was like in GR, and it was like a backyard thing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw it on your Instagram, it seemed like there was like camping and everything. It seemed like it's kind of out in the woods. And
yeah. Oh, I'm probably like mixing up titles. I do remember it, and it was outdoors, chill. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of there are other people who they're skeptical and they might share their opinion, but for the most part, it's like they're appreciative of the music, so that kind of supersedes any sort of argument they might want to start. Or
especially since live music is such a rarity now. Any event that there's anything happening music related is, for me, it's a gift. It's a gift. It's a rarity. But for people listening to the podcast who might not be familiar with the Michigan area, Grand Rapids has a very strong music scene. Very, very strong, very supportive. I know me in particular, I'm more from the east side. And every time we go over there, it's just so supportive, so loving. And there's just a huge collective of people. And Dutcher is the West Side Michigan music scene. And if you like if you have any, like after this listening, if you have any like, oh, I want to check that out, there's a couple different things. There's a recording studio, Third Coast Recording. You're pretty involved with that too.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with that recording studio? Yeah, just give us a little backstory on that one.
Yeah, I think my first time in the studio, it was a few years ago. I'm almost positive it was for a project related to the Underground Circus, which was an instrumental funk band that was kind of a precursor to Earth Radio.
Cool.
It was like me, Justin Abdeck, Justin Wieringa, drummer Mario Copeland. We just went into Third Coast one day and essentially just kind of tracked a record. We like some of it was like really easy forms, some of it was improvised, and we just built off of layers. And in that experience, that's kind of when I started meeting like Joe Hedinga and Kevin Kozel, and I think I spent the day there, and then they kind of got to see how I worked, and then months went by before I was in it again. But I came back, I think it was for another like session, like just a random studio session, and through just kind of getting to know Kevin better, Joe better, especially once Earth Radio got in the studio too, there was more of a desire of like, hey, we'd like to have you come like hang around this studio more. I had an office there with Mark Lavengood too for half a year. And then that kind of turned into another half of a year with me working with L Lively in that same office. And, just really kind of being around, available, and then, not wasting time in the studio, I think helped.
Yeah. And that's where kind of your craft comes in, when you etch in your craft and perfect it, then, because time is money in the studio. We all know that. So if you're good at what you do, they're going to keep calling you back, and you are very good at what you do. So yeah.
Thanks. Well, yeah, it is, I'd say a combination of meeting people, really showing an interest, because, there's still a part of me in the back of my head that is like, okay, I'm going to learn editing so I can be in Studio B, because I see how some studios are like, while stuff's being tracked, they like, okay, like, oh, we did the first part of this song, and then shoot it over to the other engineer. He starts editing, shoots that back, and it's like this constant flow of like tracking, editing, sending, review, mix, just keeps the wheels spinning.
Yeah. So. And for people who are just interested, Dutcher plays keyboard as his main instrument, but you also play guitar too.
I play. I'd say I play like. It's interesting because I'm taking guitar lessons actually right now. I'm doing a lesson trade with Eli Kahn, who recently joined our band but plays in After Hours, this like cool duo out of South Bend, Indiana. And I mean, he can do like the hybrid 7-string Charlie Hunter style guitar.
Oh, wow.
But also has like great, just 6-string chops. So he's showing me.
There's a name for everybody to know too. Charlie Hunter. Check him out.
Yeah, definitely.
Talk about a monster, dude. The first time I saw him was he was opening for Snarky Puppy at the Machine Shop.
I was at that show.
Yeah.
That was so wild.
We were all there.
Yeah, that was the first time I was introduced to Charlie Hunter, and I was like, okay, this dude's on some other shit.
Yeah. I just loved, even before, like, you could hearing him play. Yeah, he's great, but then also his vibe. He's just like sitting there, like you could tell he's thoroughly enjoying what he does. And, I mean, he's got his own model of guitar. Like he's on the top of the game, man, for sure.
Yeah, so cool. But yeah, I'd say because I started guitar like in high school, like I think everyone apparently starts guitar, and I was super into like, all different kinds of metal and, more aggressive rock. So I was like, I got to learn all the riffs. I got to like figure out how to play fast. And I feel like I stopped doing a lot of guitar like midway through my undergrad because I was doing a bunch of piano. And then now I'm kind of being like, oh, I have a guitar. Let's try and like transfer some of the knowledge over to that instrument.
Yeah. Well, that's I feel like one really crazy thing about music is like everyone thinks that they're like, oh, I'm going to learn how to play guitar, or I'm going to learn how to play piano, or I'm going to learn how to play trumpet. And they don't realize there's like, well, that's like a machine that you use to play music, but that's not learning music. You know,
right?
It's like once you get the knowledge from all these other, like once you get the musical knowledge, then you can transfer that to, all these other machines. It's really cool.
Yeah, I see it a lot in I know a couple like, a few church player friends, like gospel church, like such great ears for music. And they, like, I think of like my friend Sean, he can like destroy on bass, great keyboard player, can like, hang in the pocket on drums. And then I find out his first instrument's guitar. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, you're this good at all these other ones. How do you sound on guitar?
Yeah. Like, that's scary to think about. It's like, dude, I haven't heard you play guitar yet.
Yeah.
And you're just killing at all these other instruments. It's like,
dude, it's crazy. That's I think both mine and Andy's jazz professor in college at CMU. His name's Rob Smith. Dude, he is an incredible trumpet player. But it's like, have you ever heard that dude play saxophone? You ever heard that dude play bass? Like, dude, he's a monster, dude. Like a total monster.
Piano.
Yeah. Woo! Yeah. Dude.
Wow.
And it's such a cool thing that music is one of those things that once you learn the music, you can transfer that. I just think that's so cool,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good stuff, man. So you dip your toes in a lot of avenues as a musician, and I think for me personally, I've seen that more so in the past couple of years. Musicians doing a lot more things besides just playing music. So I was wondering, because you not only are you like a musician, but you're also like a recording engineer intern. Is that correct?
Yeah. And mainly, I feel like I had a little bit more experience this year doing more of the remote kind of collaborative stuff. And that really kind of got me used to that workflow a little bit better. I would love to, like I mentioned earlier, I'd love to be more involved at Third Coast on that end. But, the board they have is like, it's like a $25,000 board, and I don't want to be like, oops,
boom, fire,
broke a preamp. Like, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so you're involved in booking, you're involved in recording, you're involved in writing, like blogs too. So I was wondering if, and we're going to get to that specifically as well, all of those different avenues. But I was wondering if you just had some advice for maybe a high school student or like a beginner college student who's like, hey, I want to, you know what? I'm going to school for music. I want to do music as a living. I was wondering what your advice would be for them just getting into it right there, like where their headspace is at.
Yeah. So I know from what inspired me to kind of, look at myself as more than just a pianist. Part of it came from my family, because all my dad's side, all musicians. My grandma still teaches piano. She's like 85, and
bless her heart, man. That's
just
awesome.
Been going at it for like over probably close to 50 years now. It seems like. Oh my
goodness!
Just teaching students.
That is wonderful.
And actually, one of her students was John Prue, who is this. He grew up in West Michigan. I actually saw him briefly when I was finishing up my master's. He was kind of, like a dad, has a few kids, moved back to the area, and he's like, oh, I'm going to finish up my degree. And, but he he's made his career in Los Angeles as a kind of a jazz singer, arranger
Wow.
person.
That's cool.
But yeah, so seeing how like, you know, I interned with my uncle, which was a great way to like circumvent the weirdness of internships, but also like see that side of my family because he was living in or is living in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And he, you know, we while we were there, he had me record. He took me out like to do some different kinds of gigging. He, you know, talked about his career and the fact that it's like he's a part, you know, owns a studio that works a lot with acoustic and classical music, can play jazz piano, his main instrument's cello, and
Nice.
he has a doctorate in composition. So he writes for like dance companies that like pop up at these like festivals and do routines to his music.
Wow. That's really
And
cool.
yeah, so it was like partially seeing that. And then part of it, this quote actually came more recently, but it kind of applies to, you know, trying new things in music. Tony Hawk, the skateboarder, he I think it was a couple years ago, he released a skating app, like a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater iPhone version.
Sure.
And some lady interviewing him was like, "Why do you even like care about like how to develop an app and like what that looks like and the marketing?" And he was saying, "You got to know all parts of the business so that you know what you don't want to do." And I thought that was interesting because I've been curious about, you know, I've always wanted to go backstage. I've always wanted to be on a stage.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to see like, okay, how do, you know, what is everything from like the lighting to like, you know, different elements of production, what does that look like? So I would say as a college student or, you know, like aspiring person wanting to be a musician, know that, you know, your skills can be transferable. If you are playing guitar and you think, oh, I'm only a guitarist, well, you know, if you're playing songs and you're writing songs, like that could turn into a career in maybe you write some jingles, maybe you are you help write for the different projects you're in and you start building out your portfolio that way. Or maybe you in the studio when you're writing these songs, you get an ear for production and you want to learn the tech side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I've always thought of my music career is the piano is always, you know, I'm 28 and I've been playing piano for 20 years now.
Right.
And I know that's always going to be a part of what I do and how I present myself. But I'm also open to like, you know, like what does it look like to be a booking agent? That'll only help me inform how I'm booking my own bands or my own projects, or like what does it look like to be a writer, because then I can start to see how I can, you know, have another way of thinking critically about the art I consume and how I apply it to what I'm doing. So
that's awesome, man. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Almost you're using all of these, you're developing these skill sets, and they're also like an educational tool for you as your own individual artist. That's awesome.
yeah,
I think that's something that is super applicable across like any industry. You know what I mean? Like no matter what you want to do, if you want to actually do something yourself, you have to know all the parts that go into it. Like that's something that I'm learning in my own marketing business. Like I run a marketing business for consumer bankruptcy attorneys. And
okay,
that's yeah, I know it seems really obscure, but
Right.
that's one thing
specific.
yeah, it is, but it's something that I'm learning as well. Like I have to know how to do everything. So then when I get to the point, then I will be able to hire somebody who can do that. And I can actually show them how, and I can hold them accountable because I know how it's supposed to be done. You know, I feel like
Right.
that's so it transfers so well to any industry, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would also say too, it's like, you know, you don't have to come right out of the gate being like, oh, I'm growing my socials, I'm learning marketing, I'm doing this and this. Like I've really only hit a lot of these business end skills within the last, you know, 2-3 years coming out of my master's. And that was because, you know, I got I got inspired to just be like, you know, if I'm really going to pursue something that I enjoy, like as I was coming out of my master's, that's, you know, about a year into Earth Radio and kind of seeing the potential of that band. And now, you know, I've learned a lot in the last couple of years working with Mark Lavengood and working with Elle Lively, who, you know, works with Crooked Tree Creative and the Michigan Music Alliance and Accidentals, like just getting a lot of, you know, people giving me advice and then figuring out my own way of applying it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing. I don't remember if I brought this up on a previous podcast that we done, but that's one thing that I try and tell myself is like done is perfect, because there's so many times when I talk myself out of doing something because I know it won't be perfect. And if I don't do it, then I won't learn from it. You know?
Right.
So it's like you have to do it. You'll always learn.
I just heard that sentiment from Jack Conte, from like Pomplamoose, Scary Pockets, CEO of Patreon. He talks about work to publish, because he's the type, you know, he would do stop motion animations when he was in his like teens, and that's like tedious hours of moving like bits of clay and pieces of faces and you know, he would make these animations that would take a ton of time and then wouldn't do anything with them. And he's like, oh, I can't do that anymore. And spend like a month on a project and then just put it away.
Well, that's like the guys from South Park. They just made like they were hired to like make one little tiny kind of same animation thing, and they just like their friend hired them to make like a Christmas card, and they're like, all right, so they spent like some time on this. But they did have the incentive that they were getting paid, obviously. But they just set it out. They set it out, and they're just like, whatever. And then it ended up just gaining all the steam that they didn't even know that there was not a thought in their mind that they're like, yeah, we're gonna send this out, and it's gonna go viral before viral was even a thing.
Right.
So you just never know, really. You never know.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, it's like, you know, that was another thing Jack Conte also talked about was, you know, the video that went viral early in Pomplamoose' career was like, they just were like, oh, we'll make our own version of Single Ladies. That's a fun song. And the VMAs are coming up. Maybe you'll get some traction. And that was the year that, you know, Kanye was like, I'm gonna let you finish. And then everyone exploded and searched that song. And YouTube at the time, the way the algorithm worked, it would actually show, you know, like Beyonce's video would be in the list, but it would show like native YouTube creators more towards the top of the search option.
Yeah, when you're getting all that traction too, it's like, that is great timing.
Yeah.
Great timing.
Yeah. And then like, you know, they do other videos that take forever and they're like, this is it. This is what we've been working for. And then it's like, bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Man, that's one thing that, so I spend a lot of time like working with social media, right? Obviously, because the digital marketing thing. But in turn, I also spend time on social media, right? And that's one thing that I feel like so many creators don't focus on is they try so hard to get that one thing to pop, but don't necessarily focus on the longevity of it, where it's like, I feel like focusing on longevity is so much more important than getting one thing to pop. Because like, if you are just consistent and like, you'll gain those followers like slowly but surely, and then that following will be super dedicated to you, you know what I mean? And it's crazy.
Yeah, so I've been watching saxophone player Caleb Elzinga. Like, he's really, you know, put a ton of time into like how he's presenting himself, especially I'd say on Instagram. And, you know, he's learned at least the rhythm of like, okay, here's the kind of content I like doing. Here's what people are responding to that, you know, help kind of support my decisions of not like directly giving the audience what they want, but like being able to be like, oh, okay, it seems like, you know, certain types of photos, like these kinds of videos, like he's able to get that knowledge instead of just, you know, be like putting up a post once and then being like, well, it doesn't work. What do I didn't go viral. I'm deleting my account.
This sucks.
Dude, so speaking of social media, that's one thing that I love about your Instagram is that you don't only post music stuff. You know what I mean? Like you have stuff like about your real life, which I feel like that's the whole purpose of social media is to like have stuff about your life. And I feel like especially in music, so many of us just use social media as a business platform, you know? And so and I feel like that's not actually using it to the truest amount. So how do you go about structuring your social media posts? Do you actually like plan everything out, or is it more of like a off the cuff kind of thing?
Yeah, so I've actually kind of been doing, and I realized this, maybe a week or two ago. It was completely unintentional, but with Earth Radio's recent release of our album Reanimate last month, I was like, okay, July is when we're putting out this single. I'm going to try and really be on top of social media, like see if I can at least get, 1 to 3 posts, like either scheduled or posted per day. There's maybe 1 week where I had like, oh, I got 3 days worth of posts because there's this arc I want to try with how we're promoting our merch or something. And I'm seeing, there's benefits to that kind of structure of being like, okay, if I post at regular times, there's a rhythm to which people can expect it, almost like like a show, or like YouTube. A lot of people do that. They have their times that they post. But then I also see the benefit of, there's more authenticity on my personal page because it is more off the cuff. As much as I think of like, oh, it'd be cool, share a video, share this thing. But I've noticed kind of, I need to find the medium between it, because Earth Radio being very structured, I'm running out of things to talk about because our band is still new to and we just added 3 people, but we're new to the idea of like, hey, we should work on video. We should have posts about our rehearsals. We should, maybe have some demos on our sound. Like, let's try putting stuff out on different things. Because I'm, the main person that posts for the band. And it's, for me, it's easy to represent myself because I try not to take myself too seriously and just try, like, oh, this is funny, or like, oh, this is a cool like thing my friend did, or here's me learning a song. And with Earth Radio, I'm trying to treat it like a business, but then I'm seeing, there is that desire of like, okay, what is the band doing? Like, okay, we saw a picture of the shirts you're selling, or we saw, like a little video of like, oh, you got vinyl, cool. But, there is that trying to dial back some of the, the markety things, because our audience is still, it's still relatively small, but also they're more focused on the nerdy creative side of what we do.
Yeah.
Than
but it's like, that's also like, that's your niche. That's like that's your look,
Right.
So,
Yeah. So I feel like it's, I'd like to have a happy medium. I see, weird examples of like, I think of someone like Slash, who is on Instagram. All he posts is like either really like explicit, weird, like old school, like almost like pornographic portraiture of just like random animation, like nothing to do with his music, nothing to do with touring, nothing. It's just like, hey, here's a picture I found online. And then he always puts like text version, like he basically makes like a text slash with a top hat, like out of like colons and a semicolon and brackets. And
that's really cool,
like,
man.
So it's like, he already has an audience, so he can just do that.
Right. Yeah,
so I see a benefit of like, okay, once we get to a certain point, we can be a little bit more loose, but it's also like trying to build in a way that is trying to connect with people, but also not be overly like corporate when it's like, okay, we are trying to make money as a band, but we're also trying to share in this creative process.
Right.
So I tried, Earth Radio is trying to find that happy medium. And then for my personal page, I just like, I think of like what I just like seeing on my feed.
Yeah.
And just trying to mimic that, or,
kind of creating an aesthetic.
Yeah. Like, yeah. And not, trying not too hard to like, be like, what's my vibe? What's my flavor? Cause like it's whatever, it's kind of like playing, like whatever you naturally sit down and play at the piano is what you're going to post.
Ah, yeah.
So,
that's a very interesting point. It's like what like with individual marketing, it's like what you naturally feel should be posted. Is that what you're kind of saying? It's like just if you look too far into like, well, what's my vibe? Then it becomes inauthentic in a way.
Yeah, because I've dipped my toe into like looking at analytic charts, and there's not enough of a metric of like here's how much engagement we have, because it's like on average we get on Earth Radio's page maybe 20 to 30 like likes, and then maybe a few comments per post, and it's it's like, okay, people see it, but that I'm not going to sit there and be like, okay, so if I I have 30 a sample size of 30, so like that means I maybe can reach out to all of them, and like 2 of them might react to my prompts and then like 1 of them maybe will follow because it's very, very much like trying to stay away from a vibe that doesn't fit. Like I can't see myself doing something like a pickup jazz kind of video where I'm in like a the latest, like I'm not fashionable but I am clothing, or like looking at the camera and being like, I'm like, I can't do
it. I feel like when you're deciding what content is going to go up for a band, it's such a different vibe than figuring out what content you're going to post. And that's one thing that, like, when you're in a band, I feel like it's always best to divide and conquer as far as responsibilities of things that need to get done, right? So there's in today's day and age, there's going to be a social media person. Like there just is, right? So what tips, since you do a lot of the social media managing, what tips would you give for younger or even really any bands that may, or any people that may watch this, for creating content that suits or that you can feel comfortable representing the band, but also isn't too rigid? I know that's a kind of specific question.
Yeah. So I know part of what, because it is, I think of, Earth Radio is very, as a band, we're good at sitting in a room, nerding out about sounds, music, arrangements, performances, what's going to be different on the live version of this song versus the recording. And because of that, we have, for sure, like one day, we have Tuesdays set aside for rehearsals, and then we usually pick a Thursday or Friday as like, okay, we can do an additional rehearsal, or we can get together and just hang out. And, it doesn't happen every single week that we have 2, but in doing that, I learn very clearly, like, oh, the band hates the feeling of like when you whisper something and you think no one heard you and Amazon heard you and now you're marketed back on Facebook.
Yeah.
Like they hate that feeling of like, no, I just said pineapple. I didn't want to buy bulk pineapples.
But you know what? Maybe I do now.
Yeah, maybe I will get that 50 pack of pineapples. But like, I would say, like, I tend to go with like, when I think of a post, is like, okay, one, how is it serving the band? Like, is it related to, we got a lot of shirts and we're trying to sell them? Is it something we're trying to tell a story about an album or the lead up to an album? Is it, how is it representing? Like, I used to never think about the word brand because I always thought like, okay, we're not laundry detergent. Like, that's what a brand is. And, but, hearing it kind of put in a context of like, no, it's like how you're showing yourself to people who might find your music or find your, like, oh, that album artwork's interesting. Like, that's part of a brand, whether or not you think of, like you think it's part of the creative process, which it is, but it's also part of how the world, when they stumble upon your socials or music, they'll see, they'll hear the sound, they'll see the art, maybe you got some photos. So my advice, listening to your band and just kind of going with that gut feeling of like, okay, is this really speaking for the band, or am I too much into one side of it? And then the other thing I try to do is think of, what I want to accomplish. Each month I try to, think of a list, or, I should probably get in the habit of writing things down more, but, really trying to think of it as like, how am I going to help the band with these posts? And then how am I going to, communicate what we're doing to an audience or to people who might, find us somewhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's such a in-depth thing to think about that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize when it comes to like managing a band's social media, because it's one thing that and I know Andy, I feel like can attest to, I'm always for letting people in more, but sometimes the things that happen on the inside are not necessarily things that represent the band or the brand, and it's such a fine line to walk. So that's really interesting. I'm definitely feel like I need to take that approach more, where it's like the objective. That's what's super important.
Yeah, it speaks to the longevity of like, I want to be able to say that, I want to be able to say like, okay, I took steps that felt like, even if it's weird to start thinking of like, okay, like I'm gonna schedule posts, like, whoa, I've never done that. What does that mean? Or like, I've never really used hashtags, but like, what are those about? Like, you start to learn more about, like that Tony Hawk quote, you learn more about the thing you're doing, and then you realize like, oh, I don't really like doing this, but I do like arranging posts like this, or I do like, I like talking, like telling a story with it, or I like, having fun with it. And I also see, the benefit of just with posting and thinking about what the band's doing. That helps me offline too, when I'm trying, as a booking agent, trying to negotiate for the band. So that I'm not coming to a rehearsal and someone, especially now, like, oh yeah, they got this indoor show. I think it's like, wait, you indoor? No, like we said only outdoor shows because of the pandemic. And it's like, oh yeah, sorry, I just thought we might try it. And it's like, yeah. So being able to like, as I'm posting on the daily for the band, I'm also having the band in my mind during the day.
Right.
So that if there is a spur of the moment thing or email or whatever, I have more of like an informed like point of view to speak on behalf of the band, rather than like, especially since we added 3 people, like trying to text. Because I used to do that, try and get like everyone's opinion, make sure everyone signed off. And I realized that we were just having the same either circular conversations that I didn't really need to message them about, or we would just waste a ton of time because, a few days would go by and it's like, has anyone heard from our guitarist? Is he alive? Like, where is he?
Dude, well, that's one really interesting thing I feel like that you just brought up is communication within the group. So what kind of like tools and platforms do you use to aid that? Because I know from my own experience, that's often a really, really tough thing is to get, especially as your band gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Like sometimes texting doesn't work, but then sometimes people won't look at the Slack or anything like that. Like how?
So I tried Slack for a little bit, and then in my brain, the way I like to organize stuff sometimes is like it got a little too detailed with the different rooms, and I should have just had, the band has access to these 5 topics. And maybe that would keep things a little bit more organized versus like, we're thinking about media and merch and video and like,
right.
So I tried using Slack that it ended up being a little cumbersome. Now what tends to work is there's a couple group chats, and one is with the full band, especially with the addition of the recent people. Like we have a full, like, this is a message to everybody. And then there's a second thread that's me, Hannah, Madison, and Justin, which are like the core 4. And then within that group also, if we need to, because Earth Radio has an LLC, so me, Justin, and Hannah are all part owners of the LLC. So stripping it away from the full band means we can talk a little bit more about like some of the back end stuff and not, overwhelm a text thread when it's like, they'll hear about it at rehearsal, but right now we just need to talk with these couple people versus the whole band. So text threads have been good. But I also, if I need, if I put it out there and it's been a day or I need an answer sooner, I'll usually just call each band member individually.
Yeah.
Because everyone, especially with COVID shifting schedules, like, Madison's working at FedEx, Hannah's doing more teaching, Justin's back and forth from Muskegon, and there's not, decent internet or cell reception where he stays. So I have to always like be aware of like, okay, no one's answering because maybe Justin is in the UP. Let me try calling him. Or being flexible with a band that if they could all throw their computers in the river and live in the woods, they probably all would do it because they're sick of looking at screens.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that's most people nowadays. It's like, my eyes are like melting.
Dude,
gonna pull a Bon Iver and just go hang out in the woods for months.
Dude, I have a marketing mentor who, love him. He's a funny dude, but he seems to not have discovered blue light glasses. And so he's always complaining about, he's like, well, I look at this computer screen all day, every day, and my eyes are hurting. So now he just like, he wears sunglasses. so he'll like go live on Facebook from his like fluorescent light office with sunglasses on. I'm like, dude.
Man, you look like a creep, dude.
Yeah, it's just so funny. But yeah, I mean, that's really educational because that's something that is, I feel like, always hard, is managing communication. Like I'm not the manager in like any of the groups that I play with, but I've had people reach out saying, hey, can you guys play this? And I'll like send a message thread and it'll be like 3 or 4 days until somebody responds. And it's like, dude, we just lost this opportunity because we didn't get back fast enough. So
yeah.
Right. And and it's a thing I was thinking about it too, like systems, like it's so hard, especially like, Earth Radio is like, hey, there's this box, tear it up, no more box, or this box is now made out of this computer mouse. And what do we do with it? So like, to say like to develop a system is not going to be as cookie cutter as like an office building where it's like, okay, if you need to talk to this department, email this, and then if you need to talk to for us it's like, there's a booking email, and then there's like a band email that's kind of a leftover booking email. But yeah, like trying to get people to do Slack, that just didn't work. So if you're in a band and the best way is like, okay, we got to talk about it at rehearsal, like, all right, make a list, make sure you cover it at rehearsal, maybe text it out later in the week to remind people if it's about a gig. Right. But yeah, figure out like what system works in terms of like, you know, getting people to understand like, hey, you know, there's opportunities coming in, or we said we wanted to record, when do we want to schedule that? Or like one thing Earth Radio's been doing, we're planning another band trip, and that's been nice. But even that, you know, it took me 3 weeks to have, you know, something that's fun to like get that all wrangled, because it's like, hey, we got, you know, if we're gonna get an Airbnb, like we're a month out, like you don't know if we'll have that same thing open. Like, did you get off work? Did you get it in? And then so yeah, it's just kind of listening to like how the band works, and then and not feeling discouraged when you know they don't know how to use Slack.
But I also think there's a point to like, yes, I think finding the right system, but also if you're like a contributing member of a band, you have to make it a point to be more communicative than you maybe have in the past. And I think that adds to the chemistry too, like that adds to the overall vibe. If you can be more communicative with everybody around you, things get done faster. It creates a better tone overall. And I think that's important for musicians in general. It's like we, especially now, any gig that we take, it's like we got to pounce on it. So if you aren't responding to emails super quick, somebody else will, right? So that's like, that's a very important skill to have as a musician. Is not, I mean, you got to be good at your craft, obviously. That's rule number one. But after that, you gotta be business. You gotta be a business person.
Yeah, I've been interested in like, you know, watching some of Jack Conti's videos. Matt Diavella is another YouTuber that I check in with. And there's another similar guy, but Matt Diavella, he kind of got his bump of fame with he did the documentary on minimalism for Netflix. And
I watched
and his whole channel is like, you know, it started with a joke, like a day in the life of a minimalist, and it was like clearly a joke. It's like, I only own one spoon because that is the only amount of spoon I need. And then he's like, no, here's how it really works. And then all these videos are like, you know, he tried different, like, what if I organize my life this way, or what if I built this habit this month, or what if I, you know, like here's 5 platforms that help me stay organized. Maybe you could find something in that works. And it's interesting seeing him. He's very transparent about like, yeah, this didn't really work, and I like spent 30 days trying to make it work.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and it didn't work.
Dude, well, I feel like there's 2 sides to a band as far as industry. Right, like there's the music side, and there's that's like your creative process, and you know your craft, your artwork, and the members that comprise it. And then there's the business side, which that's what I feel like so many bands don't ever learn or figure out. And that's to me like what will hold an artist of any kind back the most. It's like the business side is. It's totally separate, and you have to separate it, I feel like, from your craft, because that side, it's a totally different way of managing it. It's a totally different skill set, but it's equally as necessary. If you want to be successful, it is necessary to know that. It's necessary to structure a system that might not be the same system as the other guys that, you know, the other band. It's not going to be the same system, but structure a system so that things work, you know?
Yeah, I was inspired by this band I've been following for a little over a decade, Periphery.
Ooh, yeah.
They're like, it was so crazy because right away with their debut album, like you look in the album credits and it was like mixed in Misha Mansour, like the band leader guitarist, is like mixed in his bedroom, and you're like, what? Like this album was made in a bedroom? And
what album was that?
That was the very first record. The one that had like
Oh,
Icarus Lives and like all
no
those
way.
classic. That was all like they sent it somewhere to get mastered, but it was all like it was tracked remotely because the singer lived in California before he was like officially in the band.
Oh,
And
okay.
then, everyone came to Misha's house in Maryland and they just were like, "Oh, I got this gear. Let's make a record."
That's
Yeah.
so cool. Those guys are
and
awesome.
and like over the 10 years, like, they didn't sign right away until they absolutely needed, the money and the resources of a label to distribute. And they, they kind of set this trend for modern rock and metal, like people who are coming up in more of a DIY or indie environment. It's like, oh, they got, like tablature books and coffee and beer and like different types of merch, different types of entertainment. Misha's got his own, he's got an audio production company under his name. The bass player who used to play with them helped develop a drum software because he's got access to this great drum room and a bunch of different drums. And like, yeah, they saw, within the band, like, oh, there's clinicians, there's software developers, there's brand
Ah,
merchandisers. Like, they just were like, what do we like to do? Oh, we like beer, we like coffee.
Yeah.
Like, we use software all the time to demo. Like, they were using TuneTrack a ton before they made Get Good drums, or like Superior Drummer for
mhm.
like, yeah, MIDI drums. And
Hmm.
so to see, like, as the band matured, like it very naturally turned into like Misha has his own like pedal company now
Wow.
that I saw was at NAMM, and I was like, oh, he's got like 4 pedals and his own line of strings. And that's not even like, that's not like, oh, the Misha string brand from Elixir or
Mhm,
GHS or something.
mhm,
It was like his own brand of strings developed to his tastes
mhm.
that he owns the IP for and can like just sell.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, that's interesting because I
I
had
feel
never
like you,
thought of it that way.
I feel like you see a lot of musicians doing that, like Wolfpack with the Wolf compressor. Like that's, I mean, they developed that to create their own sound, and then they're just like, hey, let's just sell it, and they made a killing off of
Yeah. Well, I
it. So
mean,
cool.
I feel like when you're starting, well, not even just like starting a band, but when you're in a band, there's like I said earlier, like that divide and conquer kind of thing, right?
Right.
But I feel like the way that I look at it is like every person is the head of a certain department.
Yes.
If we were to think about it in business terms, you know what I mean? Like you have your social media department or your marketing department, then you have your, just like these different
Right.
segments. And then when I imagine like a band growing, because when you grow, when you're like, Anderson Paak or, Jesse Reyes or any of these people, you have teams of people that are making this whole thing work. And in my eyes, I'm somebody who I don't really want to sign to a label like ever. I just think that
Right.
that's it's not for me. I'll leave it at that. But we're in a day and age where you don't have to, and so every single person should manage something, and as it grows, they become the heads of those departments. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's kind of, that was a learning curve too for me being more involved in the business end with Earth Radio, is that I wanted, I want to be able to delegate stuff, but then as, especially as things have slowed down, like last year was so like album, Kickstarter, like bunch of shows, boom, 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 boom. And then this year was like, oh, we had a show in March and the stream in May
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
the single in July. And
Yep.
it's like
Yep.
very I've come to like, I see like Justin Abdeck, I'm not going to ask him to like, use any sort of like crazy software to do some kind of business end thing, but I will let him, if he wants to play around with every pedal that's ever existed. That's only going to benefit the band because we're going to get cool stuff for the live shows. We're going to get interesting production tricks for the studio. And then like, you know, Madison's working this day job, and he's also, you know, kind of scatterbrained when it comes to like, okay, what do I need to get done in a day in between work? So I'm fine with him because he's such a good drummer that his two things that benefit the band, he's very sociable, and, you know, after a gig, he's the one that's like, just like fired up and like talking to everyone and endearing
networking
the crowd to the band more. But then he's also like this great drummer who can like, you know, call up people to shed or like be featured on other different projects. And, you know, it's like everyone has their instrument as like, we're the manager of our instruments, but that even if they don't think of it, it's like, as you're, you know, these other side things that are part of the culture of being a musician, that's also kind of what you become in charge of. And you brought
up a good point. It's like finding like the group that you're in, finding everybody's strengths and adhering a job to those strengths. I think that's really cool. I never really thought about that, but that's really, because you're going to get, especially if your band grows and you know, your band full of musicians, you're going to get a bunch of different people, you know, so it's very different people.
Very different people. And like, well, and I keep mentioning these three people we added. So Eli Khan, one of them, the person from South Bend I mentioned earlier, his band is great because it's a duo. It's his friend Arthur, great drummer. And then Eli plays, you know, a hybrid 7-string guitar, synthesizers, sequencers, has a very elaborate pedal setup to like handle different looping and layering. And he also can do a little bit of freestyling and singing. So he's very like multifaceted as a creator. But then, you know, because it's a duo, he hustles really hard to like book shows and market, and like, you know, it's easier to schedule band photos for two people. And then, you know, Justin Wieringa, I've worked with him in numerous projects. Like we have 2 albums of ambient music we haven't put out yet that we're finishing. But he's also like, you know, bluegrass, chicken picking, plays with Mark Lavengood sometimes. We played together in the Gravestones for I think 4 years.
Wow.
And that was like, you know, funk, jam, improvising all the time.
Right.
But yeah, he can play like anything with strings, basically. And then David Ward, drummer out of Ann Arbor, plays with Sabbatical Bob. He was going to be actually a replacement drummer, because at the time Madison had auditioned for the War and Treaty, got the gig, and then COVID.
I remember when that went down.
Yeah, and so he's still, as of now, he still has the gig, but there's not enough of a compelling reason to move down to Nashville, both, you know, income wise and opportunity wise. So even though he's still here, David is like now kind of a percussionist / person who can switch with Madison on live shows. And he's got the great jazz background, but he's, you know, got a good pocket and just another good personality for the band, but can also do a little accounting. So it's like, oh, we got another financial person who can help.
that is super helpful. That area specifically is very helpful. Somebody who can run the books.
The books, dude. The books.
Yeah.
Talk about a pain in the ass, dude. The books.
There's so many. We had a recent book thing where we're like, where did we spend like $350? And it said like Kickstarter, and we're like, did we pay Kickstarter for our Kickstarter? Like what happened? And then we forgot that like months ago, we all agreed as a band to use the band funds to buy a video synthesizer from Critter and Guitari, and it was, took months before it shipped. And we're like, oh, okay, we did agree on this, and this is cool, and this is what we wanted, but we just totally, it was one of those things like you always think you're like so organized, and then some notification pops up and you're like, what? No, when did that?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. And that concludes part 1 of our conversation with Dutcher Snedeker. Stay tuned this Thursday, January 28th at 11 a.m. for part 2. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you then.